Good day, everyone. Our program will begin in just a moment. Hello, everyone. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day, and welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, Israel at War, a series featuring programs surrounding the evolving situation in Israel and the region, understanding the impact around the world, and sharing action items you can take from wherever you are. Last week, IDF troops killed Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, who is directly responsible for the deaths of thousands and the orchestration of the October 7th terror attacks. He led an Iranian proxy terror group sworn to Israel's destruction, dedicated to murdering Jews and willing to use innocent civilians as human shields in their acts of terror. Joining us today on the ground in Israel to discuss the current state of affairs is AJC Jerusalem Director Lt. Colonel Reserve Avital Leibovich. This will be in conversation with AJC's Chief Policy and Political Affairs Officer, Jason Isaacson. After we hear from Jason and Avital, we will take your questions. You may email your questions to questions@ajc.org. That's questions plural, or use the Q&A feature in Zoom. Jason and Avital, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thanks very much, Daniel. Hello, everyone. Before we begin our discussion, Avital, please allow me to again express to you, my, and all our AJC colleagues and supporters gratitude for your consistent availability throughout this difficult, dangerous period to brief the AJC family on the challenges that Israel faces. The trauma that Israel suffered on October 7th and onward, and the remarkable resilience of the people of Israel in the face of terrorism. Allow me also to wish you and your family and our AJC colleagues in Jerusalem a healthy and, let's hope, a more peaceful new year. We are meeting now 1 week after a major development, as Daniel just explained, perhaps even a turning point in Israel's necessary war against Hamas, the killing of the terrorist organization's leader, the murderous mastermind of October 7, Yahya Sinwar, by the IDF in Rafah in southern Gaza. I want to hear your thoughts on the ramifications of that successful operation, which has been praised by the U.S. and other world leaders. But first, let me ask you 2 questions. First, how was the IDF able to finally track down this most wanted war criminal? And second, how did Sinwar's elimination figure in Israel's set of priority objectives for the self-defensive campaign that it has been conducting in Gaza?
Thank you, Jason, for your kind opening words, and it's always good to be with you here on another, what I think will be an interesting session for our listeners. So it was the day of October 16th, a few days ago. IDF troops, actually reserve unit, were working in a neighborhood in Rafah called El Sultan neighborhood. This is approximately 1 kilometer from Israel, so it's a relatively short distance. These soldiers have identified 3 suspicious figures in between, moving from one area to another between buildings, and they fired towards the suspects, and then the group split into 2. 2 of them stayed in one area and another one stayed in another building. And in order to make sure that buildings are not booby-trapped, so the forces are not endangered, what the IDF often does, it sends a drone with a camera inside the building, searching and checking out to see who is exactly there. And then they saw on a couch in the corner of the living room, this was, by the way, a very fancy villa in this neighborhood. They saw a figure sitting there with his head covered, with his face covered, and armed with a weapon, with grenades, and they fired. They understood that this is a terrorist, and they fired towards that person. Because, again, there was danger of the amount of explosives that were placed in this specific house, it took only 24 hours until the forces returned and then searched the house. When they got to this terrorist sitting on the armchair, they suddenly realized that it looked very similar to Sinwar. But in order to check, whether it was Sinwar or not, they had to take a DNA sample from one of his fingers, and Sinwar has been in Israeli prisons for many years, and therefore his DNA samples is already there. So it took a few more hours, and then it was identified finally as Yahya Sinwar. And of course, there was a big press briefing, announcement by the prime minister, by the army, and so on. What else was found on his body was the following: a small gun, a big rifle, flak jacket filled with different kinds of grenades, 40,000 shekels, which is equivalent of something like $12,000 in cash, a passport of someone else, an UNRWA certificate of another person on another identity. And that's more or less what was found. The two others that were that split from him and went to another house were actually his bodyguards. Later on, when the army searched deeper, it reached a conclusion that the tunnel that 6 hostages were held in and were murdered viciously by Hamas just 6 weeks before were just a few hundred meters from where Sinwar was. And they also found out that actually they served as human shields for Sinwar until he escaped. So basically he was running from one place to another until he was found that day, 16th of October, in that building.
And how high on the list of Israel's military objectives in Gaza was the elimination of Sinwar?
So yeah, you can imagine that since he's the #1 terrorist of Hamas, and he is the mind behind October 7th, obviously he was ranked very high on the list of most wanted. I can say that his brother Muhammad is still on that list, and Israel has announced already that it will hunt Muhammad as well. And I think that if there was a ray of light on October 17th, it was exactly when it was announced officially that Sinwar was eliminated. I think every Israeli home was as much as we could under the circumstances expressed joy that Sinwar was gone.
You can imagine supporters of Israel around the world, in our country, but all over, I think, share that sentiment as well. But let's talk about the ramifications now of Sinwar's death for Hamas and also for the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has provided money, weapons, training, guidance to Hamas. I have a few related questions. First, Hamas has already put forward the claim that its fight continues, that it isn't relinquishing its hold on Gaza. Can Hamas still legitimately make that claim that it is in control in Gaza?
So I think that if we're looking at, the comments from all over the world regarding primarily the terror groups in Iran, we see a lot of support for the way of Hamas. Sinwar was actually painted as a shaheed, as a martyr, as someone who fought until the very last minute, who acted in a very brave way. In other words, it's some kind of glorification for Sinwar, but also for Hamas in another way. I have to say that even the PLO, the executive committee of the PLO actually offered condolences for the death of Sinwar, which was also quite disturbing, I have to say. And Abu Mazen's party, Fatah, one of the members of the Fatah, the guy by the name of Abbas Zaki, said that Sinwar has chosen, and I'm quoting, an exit worthy of his heroism and the heroism of his people. So that's the mood in the Palestinian street, and that's the mood among the other Arab terror groups, Muslim terror groups, extremists in Iran, in Hezbollah, and other places. So the question is, what are now Israel's immediate goals in Gaza following Sinwar's death? So Israel has been concentrating in one main area, and this is an area very close to the envelope of Gaza. It's what we call northern part of Gaza, primarily an area called Jabalia. Jabalia is a place that, according to the Israeli intelligence, unfortunately, there has been a big crowding of Hamas terrorists who are taking shelters in schools or in local civilian facilities where civilians are. So Israel has been trying to encourage the population to go out of this part of Gaza, northern Gaza. It has been doing so by leaflets, by phone calls, by messages on their phones, and so on. The problem was, the challenge was with this situation that Hamas prohibited the population of leaving. But when Sinwar died, this has changed. And we saw two interesting things in the Palestinian street in Gaza. Number one, people have started to move from the northern part of Gaza. Actually, 20,000 people already relocated from that area. We saw 150 Hamas terrorists turn themselves in. But we also saw, Jason, another thing which we have not seen in a long time. And these are multitudes of Gazans which are not being afraid to speak to the camera, with their faces totally uncovered, exposed, and cursing Hamas and cursing Sinwar and wanting a better future for themselves. So this phenomenon is actually growing more and more. So while Israel is working in Jabalia, there's still part of the army which is working in Rafah, in the Rafah area. Tel Sultan is one of the neighborhoods, as we mentioned before. So it's still very tactical. There are still a lot of rockets that are flowing in from Gaza. We're not at the end at this point of time. And if you like, we can dig into the numbers of the achievements that Israel has in Gaza.
Yeah, but stay on this for a second. This is fascinating. I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is that the kind of the culture of fear that Hamas has used to basically make it impossible for Palestinians to think of an alternative form of governance or an alternative relationship with Israel. That culture is at least been damaged by the death of Sinwar, not eliminated probably, but certainly weakened, which does give you some hope that there can be a day after in which there's a very different governing structure, a very different mentality that exists in Gaza.
About the hope part, I'm not so sure. I have to say, I want to be very hopeful, but we're not there yet. And I'll tell you
Long
why.
term.
Long term for sure. I'll tell you, but I want to be more concise in my answer because, one of the things I'm sure people are asking themselves is Sinwar replaceable? So I want to share with you 6 figures that are the potential list for replacing Sinwar. Number 1 is Khaled Mashal, is a well-known personality. He's currently the head of what we call the external Hamas leadership. As you know, Hamas has 2 other countries which they're based in, Qatar and Turkey. He served also as the predecessor of Sinwar, and he lives in Qatar. That's number 1. Number 2, Musa Abu Marzouk. It's another known figure. He was in Sinwar's position a long time ago. He lives in Qatar as well. Then we have Muhammad Darwish. He is the head of the Hamas Shura Council. He's considered actually a shadow figure and does not appear in public too much, but he deals with Hamas policy. And he lives in Qatar. He's known for his connections with the Iranians. The next person is Khalil Al-Khaya. He is the deputy head of the political bureau of Hamas. Actually, he is the deputy of Sinwar. I would say he's more kind of a gray kind of figure. He lives in Qatar. He also has some involvement on ceasefire and negotiation talks and release of the hostages. And then we have Muhammad Nazal, another member of the Hamas Political Bureau, one of the most prominent spokespeople for the Hamas terror group. And the last one is Zahir Jabarin, member of the Hamas Political Bureau since 2021. And he's also in charge of the Judean Samaria area or the West Bank. And he lives in Turkey. So these are the potential replacements for Sinwar. And the question here really remains, who will take the lead? Whether it will be another figure from Gaza, or will it be an external figure? And of course, each of the options has its own consequences. So if we're looking at Qatari-based Hamas leaders, which are more prone to pressure from the US or from other countries, that's one reason to be optimistic vis-a-vis maybe a future deal with the hostages. But if we're looking at someone from Gaza or someone from the West Bank who will come to Gaza, then I think we're looking at more of the same kind of scenario. So this is where we are in terms of the current situation in Hamas and Hamas leadership. Let's see what conclusion they will reach.
Sinwar's brother is not considered in line for promotion?
So, the opinions here vary. There are those who say that since he's hunted by Israel, then he will not have the capability to deal with it. There are others that say that he's a natural replacement. But I gave you the list on purpose so you can understand that the options are not just one or two people, but more
Indeed.
than that.
So let's talk about what the implications of Sinwar's death are for the fate of the hostages. It's been over a year. There are 101 still held, many of them no longer alive. We understand a desperate situation in brutal captivity held by Hamas. What AJC was hearing before the death of Sinwar, when we were having meetings on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly with people who had intimate knowledge of the negotiating process with Hamas, was that there had been no response for a month from Sinwar on the possibility of a hostage release ceasefire deal. Does the death of Sinwar make it harder, make it easier to be able to resume negotiations? What is your sense?
So yeah, that's the big question. The big question is now who is in control? Because with Sinwar gone, obviously, Hamas in Qatar will have the capability to influence more. He was the main barrier to any deal that was proposed. That's the reason that a few days ago, earlier this week, the head of Shabak, Secret Services, was rushed to Egypt with some kind of an offer. And actually, when Secretary Blinken just ended his visit a few hours ago in Israel, what he said next to his plane before he left was about his, I would say, strategy for the potential hostage deal. And the strategy says that instead of going for the big deal of 101 hostages with stages, being released in different stages, let's try to feel the water. And let's say we're talking about a smaller deal with a minimal amount of time for ceasefire, with just a few hostages that will be released. So in other words, not a very threatening deal, but something to work with. And here again, the question is if the Hamas leadership in Qatar will be able to go along with this kind of deal. I think we're in a very, very narrow window of opportunities. And I think this is the reason why Secretary Blinken is not leaving the area yet and is continuing from one Arab capital to another. I know that he's in Riyadh now, and he's still continuing to other areas tomorrow as well. So that really remains the question, whether the leadership of Hamas in Qatar will have the capability to lead a deal, even a smaller deal. If that will come across, then we can open the window wider and we can shoot for a bigger deal.
Yeah,
you're right. There are 101 hostages held in horrible conditions, terrible conditions. Some of the bodies, Jason, that were retrieved to Israel were weighed, and a girl who is 24 years old was weighing 36 kilograms. That equals to a weight of a third grader, something like that. So we do understand that it's every day that passes it's critical. The estimation is that there are 44 hostages which are no longer living, but the number may be higher because the intelligence information is
Yeah.
as we know, not 100%.
Thank you, Avital. Let's discuss with Sinwar's death what the further dismantling of Hamas means for Iran and the regime's ambitions to maintain a ring of fire, as they call it, around Israel. Are there signs that Tehran recognizes the depletion of its arsenal against Israel with the weakening of Hamas, the reality that Israel, with the irreplaceable support of the United States, is not going to succumb to terrorism? Is that reality sunk into Tehran, or are the messages that we're hearing as defiant and aggressive as ever?
So before I answer your question, I just want to leave our viewers with the condition of Hamas in terms of military capability.
Okay.
So everybody understands the achievements after 1 year, and the goal is not completely reached yet, but at least where we are. So according to the information I have, the estimation in Israel is that 50% of Hamas personnel has been eliminated. So around 17,000 people out of the 24 Hamas battalions, and a battalion is a few hundreds of people, something like 22 battalions have been totally dismantled. And the estimation is that they have something like 90% damage to their rocket arsenal. Just to compare, today they're firing something like 4 rockets a day. And if I'm looking at May, the month of May, just a few months ago, they had the capability to fire 12 rockets a day. So that's where we are in terms of their capability. So in terms of Iran, what we've been hearing in the last couple of weeks, actually 3 weeks, we've heard all across the leadership of Iran threats to Israel, primarily on the issue of the Israeli attack. These threats came at all levels, whether chief of staff, whether it's the president, the foreign minister of Iran has been leaping from one Arab capital to another for a very long time, including unique places which he haven't visited in a long time. Today we saw the president of Egypt have a meeting with the president of Iran for I don't know how many years the two have not met. So where is Israel at this point? Israel will retaliate after the Iranian attack of 181 ballistic missiles. There are 4 options in terms of Israel's capabilities. The first option is to attack nuclear sites of different kinds. The second option is what I call economic targets. It could be oil, but it could be other means of economic assets to Iran. The third option could be government facilities. And the fourth option could be military bases. There is also an option to mix between the 4, or some of the 4, 2 of the 4, 3 of the 4. I do want to mention that earlier this week, the US has sent here a battery, an air defense battery called THAAD, which became operational a few days ago. And at a very interesting timing, just when Secretary Blinken ended his visit, photos were released of the placing of the battery somewhere in Israel. So I think that was very, very much appreciated, I would say, by the Israelis here, because one of the concerns, Jason, is that this time around, once Israel hits Iran, Iran will not wait and will retaliate quickly. And that's why there is a greater need for this defense system here on the Israeli soil. So that's where we are in terms of Tehran. No change whatsoever in the course, just same messages. But of course, we see a lot of anxiety because the intensity of the messages that we heard from the Iranians all call out and highlight their fear, their anxiety, and so on. But there will be an Israeli retaliation. I don't see a situation where it will not happen.
Thank you. Avital, and thanks also for pointing out the important role that the United States has been playing, not only with this deployment of THAAD with 100 U.S. military personnel, but also the deployment of aircraft carrier battle groups in the region, missile launching submarines, fighter squadrons. The U.S. has been at Israel's back throughout this process. That's very important. And AJC, of course, has been in constant touch with our government about this. Let's talk about the northern front. We've been focusing on Iran, the head of the snake, and we've been talking about what's happening in Gaza. But talk about the fight against Hezbollah, the very significant efforts that Israel has made with ingenuity and courage to weaken, to decapitate much of the Hezbollah leadership. The strike against Nasrallah that occurred just, what is it, now a month ago. Hezbollah is still firing missiles on a regular basis into Israel, large volumes of missiles. But it had a huge arsenal, much of which I think, or at least a significant portion of which has been eliminated by Israel, along with command structure. What threat does Hezbollah continue to pose to Israel? When can you foresee the possibility that the 60,000 or so Israelis who have had to leave their homes in the north, Arabs and Jews alike, who have been targeted by all of this and have suffered casualties because of all this, when can they return to their homes? What steps need to be taken in order for that to be possible?
Right. So if I mentioned an average of 4 rockets a day from Hamas, then today, I think there were something like 120 rockets that were fired by Hezbollah, and we're not at the end of the day yet. I personally sat in shelter 3 times last week. Once was a barrage of 40 rockets at 1:38 a.m. The second time was a barrage of 20 rockets at midnight. And the third time was only 5 rockets. That was 11:30 a.m. So they still have major capabilities. If I'm looking at the last year, Hezbollah joined this resistance, as they call it, battle on October 8, 23. They have fired more than 12,400 rockets in the last year. We know that number of Hezbollah terrorist casualties are more than 1,500. We know that, of course, we eliminated the vast majority of the senior leadership of Hezbollah. There was 1 or 2 people still alive. But here's the situation right now on the ground. We are still not finished with the month of October, but September was a huge leap in terms of Hezbollah's firing capabilities. So if in August they launched something like 220 attacks the entire month of August, in September, they already crossed 330 rockets. And I think that this month, October, will be even higher. So in a way, Hezbollah somehow is trying to show that despite of the fact that the senior leadership has been eliminated, they're still operating business as usual. Now, this is not the case, I have to say. And when the IDF crossed very minimal area, very close to the border, we're talking about 1 to 2 kilometers in dozens of villages which are right on the border. These are villages that Hezbollah actually fired from on the Israeli community. So when the forces crossed in, they found 2 interesting things. Number 1, huge amount of arsenal of weapons. Most of the condition of these weapons was brand new. You can see Cornet missiles, which are wrapped in sort of new plastic wrap. You saw launchers, which are brand new. We saw grenades and different military gear, which is brand new. Of course, there were tunnels, many kinds of tunnels for the terrorists to stay in. But we also saw another phenomenon, is that in most of the villages, we didn't see large number of Hezbollah terrorists. And the reason is that either they fled after they heard what happened to Nasrallah and other terrorists in Hezbollah, and they felt that there is no command chain, really. So that's what we are seeing. So we know there is a devastating attack in the chain of command in Hezbollah, but they still have the launching capabilities. And this is something, of course, which is concern. So the ground operation that is still ongoing, it's been going on for almost a month, has three main goals. Number one is to clean the area from weapons, from terrorists, to make sure that tunnels are no longer there. We did find a tunnel which crosses the border into Israel. And of course, we blocked it, and we're still searching for others. Number two, to begin setting the ground for the next phase. The next phase could be, of course, the Lebanese army or with another international force. And for Israel to come in a better condition while it's beginning its negotiations on an agreement. And in the meeting yesterday that Secretary Blinken had with Netanyahu, if you looked very carefully in the picture, you can also see Amos Hochstein sitting there. And I have no doubt that this was one of the main issues discussed, even that next to the plane before leaving, Blinken didn't say a word about Lebanon. He only referred to Gaza. But I have no doubt that this was a main issue in the meeting. So Hezbollah still has the capability. By the way, this morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, there was a barrage of rockets to Tel Aviv in the vicinity. And of course, Haifa is getting dozens of rockets every day. So they still have the capability. They don't have the command. Another thing Israel did this week, which is also interesting, it's a change of attitude in a way, is attacking its financial resources. So I have to say, I was there in the army when it happened. It was very interesting to see. So Israel chose, based on intelligence, 7 targets that were all associated with some kind of, it's not really a bank because a bank has certain rules and so on. It's not really a bank, but it's like a loaning kind of facilities which the people in Lebanon could put their gold in for safekeeping or their money, and they can invest there. This was one of the incomes of Hezbollah. And once they were all eliminated, all 7 of them, I think it was also a very disturbing message from Hezbollah's perspective.
I mean, it's talked about in the media as the bank for Hezbollah. So it's
right.
Obviously it would have enormous impact on their ability to function.
Right. And one of the issues was actually two nights ago, Israel attacked a hospital that in the eastern wing of the hospital, in the basement, there is intelligence information of the amount of money which Nasrallah has been storing, jewelry and money and gold bars, something which is estimated in $500 million. And after the announcement, what did Hezbollah do the next day? It invited foreign journalists to the basement to show that there's nothing there. This is very similar to what Hezbollah did in the airport of Beirut a few months ago. And again, of course, not revealing all the areas, and there were locked doors. And one of the reporters from a Lebanon TV, which is not a pro-Hezbollah TV, gave a report and said, well, we walked around. There was one specific area which we asked to go in. There was a locked door, but a few young men prevented us from going there. After he got so much criticism on his report, he retracted and today already published an apology about that. So that's a new angle attacking Hezbollah's financial assets.
By the way, we can't talk about Hezbollah without citing the fact that today, 41 years ago today, was the Hezbollah attack on the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut and French Marine barracks, French military installation in Beirut, resulting in the death of 241 U.S. military personnel, 58 French military personnel, 41 years ago today. This is a problem that the world has faced and that the Lebanese people have faced and that Israel has faced for decades.
And Israel has eliminated the man in Hezbollah who was in charge of this attack a few weeks ago. And there's no doubt that the world is a better place without these terrorists.
Let's, I mean, I wanted to ask when you expect it will be possible that Israelis can return to their homes. And I guess that is a question that just has to remain in the air because it really depends on Hezbollah's retreat from its aggressive posture toward Israel.
So I think that, the forces on the ground will not stay there indefinitely. I mean, the way they're operating is they're cleaning a village and then moving to the next one. And we're talking about 4 divisions, 4 infantry divisions, which are there on the ground. So it's a lot of forces which are working at the same time on quite a big area. So I don't think that will last for a long time, maybe a few weeks' time, and that's it. Really a few weeks, not long. A long time. But the question is, what will the future arrangement look like? We all understand that UN Resolution 1701, which was relevant to 18 years ago, is no longer relevant. And the question is, how do we prevent another resolution of breaking apart, falling apart like it did 18 years ago? So Hezbollah actually, for the first time this week, admitted that it's actually dealing with and talking about arrangements. For the first time, they admitted it, that it's happening still under fire. They've never admitted it before. And the question is really, what will Israel have as part of this arrangement so it will be able to defend those 63,000 residents of the Israeli communities, you said Jews and Arabs, and they would be able to live their lives. So that's the big question now. There are different options. One thing is clear, that UNIFIL, the same UN force that is there for so many years, really failed to monitor and follow UN Resolution 1701. They don't have the tools, that the mandate never really changed in the past, changed a little bit, but never gave them the capability to really do anything. And we had this week a visit of the Italian foreign minister in Israel. And when he met the Israeli foreign minister, he admitted that UNIFIL needs to completely change, or another international force should replace UNIFIL. And the question is, of course, will this be a part of the arrangement? Will we only rely on the Lebanese army? And the example I always like to give is, imagine a village, one of those villages, for example, the IDF is working in. There's a family that lives in the village. Family has 2 sons. One is in the Lebanese army and one is in Hezbollah. And if we don't do the separation between the two, another arrangement will crumble apart. So that's why Israel does not want to, throw these achievements to the garbage. It really needs to work hand in hand with our American partners, with others, to make sure that the arrangement allows those 63,000 people to return. It's not in the near future, obviously.
Indeed. And the UN interim force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, which, as you say, has not fulfilled the expectations, the desire of Lebanese people as well, who are not connected to Hezbollah, but certainly the people of Israel, for a zone that would provide for the peace on that border. They haven't
I'll
done
give
their
you just
job.
a small example
But
for
no,
that.
one more point I want to make, which is that to hear now people around the world, government officials, not only in my country, but across Europe, talk about how it's important to implement Security Council Resolution 1701 and have UNIFIL being, empowered to actually provide for the peace on that region, is so distressing after years and years and years of UNIFIL basically not doing anything to stop Hezbollah from arming itself and from preventing the people of Lebanon to have peace on that border and control of their own destiny. Please go ahead,
Indeed,
Tom. Sorry.
No, sure. I mean, I agree with you 100%. But for example, I mean, you would not even understand the absurdity unless you see it with your own eyes. Imagine a UNIFIL base. They have dozens of bases and outposts all along the border, and there's a tunnel next to it. Now, to dig a tunnel in the terrain of Lebanon with the Rocky Mountains, you really need to dig and to work. This is not the beach sand in Gaza. So a tunnel there takes a year or 2 years to dig. And when you dig a tunnel, you bring trucks because you need to remove the rocks somewhere and the sand. And it's right underneath the UNIFIL outposts. And nothing is mentioned. And some of these tunnels are 10 years old. So it's beyond failure. It's beyond failure.
Yeah.
And let's see what the new kind of arrangement will bring.
I want to talk to you about the Houthis, which is yet another front that Israel faces, the Houthis in Yemen, who have been supplied, been armed, been funded by Iran, and have been firing missiles at Israel, but also drones, but also have interrupted maritime traffic in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Is that Israel has tried to respond, has actually led a campaign to take out parts of the port in Aden, and of course the United States just in the last week has inflicted severe losses on, I think, some of the arsenal that the Houthis have built up. What more are you expecting on that yet other front that Israel has to face?
So definitely you mentioned another front, another one of the 7 fronts that we've been dealing with here. And let's remind our viewers who are the Houthis. First of all, we're talking about 350 to 500,000 Shiite fighters. This is approximately 1/3 of the population of Yemen. Yemen is the poorest country in the region. The original name of the Houthis is not Houthis, it's Ansar Allah, means supporters of Allah, supporters of God. And the reason why we call it the Houthis, it's because the first commander of the Houthis is Hussein Badr el-Hout, and he was eliminated in 2014 by the Yemenite army. So basically, they took a city by the name of Saada. They turned it to the unofficial capital of the Houthis. Basically, it's a country within a country, very similar to what Hezbollah did in Lebanon, by the way, which they took the Dakhia neighborhood and took control of it. Basically, on their flags, we see different kinds of slogans. One is death to America. The second one is death to Israel. The third one is curse on the Jews. And the fourth one is victory for Islam. So if you're wondering how this poor country and these 350,000 sandal-wearing, dress-wearing fighters get these missiles which can travel 2,000 kilometers because Yemen geographically is a lot further from Israel than Iran, then the answer, of course, leads us back to Iran. So Iran has been using one of the ports, basically Al Hudaydah port, as support for supplying the Houthis with different kinds of weapons, whether it's drones that can explode, they can travel, fly for a long time, and rockets that can explode in various directions. So on July 20, after a 50-year-old Israeli man was targeted by a Houthi drone in his apartment in Tel Aviv, and Israel was actually quite not responsive to the Houthis' attacks for a long time. It decided to attack, and there were 2 reasons why Israel attacked the oil cans or area in Yemen. So the income of the Houthis from oil is something like $1.8 billion a year. And basically, since that has been exploded by Israel, on July 20, they are expected to have serious economic problems. By the way, of course, the assumption is that they will turn to Iran for financial help following that. The second reason why this port, Hudaydah port, was elected is that 70% of the import of Yemen is crossing through this port. And of course, what we care about is the Iranian weapons import, which include different kinds of weapons, from anti-tank missiles to drones to different kinds of rockets. Basically, the way they smuggle the weapons is through vessels who look very, I would say, very innocent, that travel to this port. Now, you mentioned the Red Sea, and that's a reason to say that the Red Sea is not an Israeli issue. It's a more international related issue, because 12%, until the war started and the Houthis began to react, 12% of the world export actually traveled through this route of the Red Sea. And obviously, there is some major implications, economic implications. Egypt is one of the countries that has been affected tremendously. And as for the US attack on October 17th, a few days ago, the Minister Austin actually confirmed, I think it's the first of its kind of an extent of an attack, that the US Army attacked 5 different underground weapon storage facilities. Now, the fact that the US chose to highlight the fact that it's underground no doubtly sends a clear message to Iran, which, as you know, most of its weapons are stored underground. But there was another thing. The aircrafts that the American Army used were B-2. And this is something that, of course, only the US has. And another indication or another message saying that, you know, this is something that we have and we can use it in other fronts as well. Now, the Houthis has a spokesperson who gives messages almost on a daily basis. We need to see in the coming days and weeks whether there is a deterrence here from the Houthis or not. If I'm looking at the summary of the amount of launchers that Yemen, the Houthis, fired to Israel since the beginning of the war, then we're looking, Jason, at 180 launches. So maybe it seems like a very remote attack here and there. It's 180. It's a rocket here and a rocket there and a drone to Eilat and another drone to the Golan. 180 rockets and drones from a country which does not border in Israel, but still Iran employs as a proxy.
And of course, America has organized a coalition of forces to protect maritime shipping off the coast of Yemen, and really, frankly, until last week, although there had been some previous American actions against Houthi targets, the tide turned, it sounds like, last week, that with the support of the coalition, there is now a more aggressive, necessary posture by the United States to take out these threats. And I'm very glad that you pointed out the nature of the American bombing campaign in Yemen and the signal that it sent to Iran. Let me go back to what you referenced earlier about the visit of Secretary Blinken, which just concluded his 11th visit to the region since October 7th of last year. Remarkable investment that the United States is making and trying to bring about a different reality in the region and a better future for the region and release the hostages that are being held by Hamas. But what about the level of confidence that the public in Israel feels about the relationship with the United States, about the way that the United States has handled Israel's security needs, political needs in the United Nations forums and other forums? Is there a feeling that America has Israel's back?
Look, I think that there's a great admiration for the fact that the US is supporting Israel, because, you know, I live here and I know what has arrived through the Israeli Air Force bases, and I'm familiar with the presence of American troops on the ground, and but the Israeli public sees the various American leaders who come here, whether it's the commander of Central Command, General Kurilla, whether it's Austin, whether it's Secretary Blinken, whether it's the American president who speaks about it, they all speak about it, and they all speak about the ironclad partnership that both countries have. I think there's joint interests here, and there are conflicting interests. The joint interest, of course, is strong Israel. There's no question about it. I don't believe that we will see any arms embargo by the US. I don't think it's an option. It's not in America's interest to even consider it's an option. And the only reason I'm bringing it up, because I heard an American politician somehow refer to it. So I don't really think that's something that Israelis believe will happen. So that's a joint interest, having a strong Israel. From a military perspective, a military edge, from an intelligence perspective, that's an American interest, and that's where we join. I also think that the commitment to the hostage deal is remarkable. I mean, Secretary Blinken was here for 24 hours, and he still found the time to meet with the American families of the hostages. And he does that every single time. He's not the only one who's doing it. So that's also, of course, a joint interest. And of course, the right for Israel and the understanding for Israel's need to defend itself. That's something that is repetitive. Where is the conflicting interest? It's the timing. At the end of the day, it's the timing. Because while the US likes to see the war end, actually, they wanted already to see the war in Gaza end months ago. If I take you to March, there were so many public American statements about not going into Rafah. Imagine, by the way, if Israel would not have gone into Rafah, I don't know if Sinwar would be eliminated. And also, 4 weeks ago, when Israel sent the troops to the ground operation in Lebanon, and there were leaks to the American media that they're about to enter. So I understand the political implications. I understand the timing issue. From an Israeli perspective, the situation is seen in a different way because, number one, Israel needs to rebuild its deterrence. Israel's deterrence in the region has eroded tremendously in the last 20 years. And in order to rebuild it, you need time to do it. You need to show your strength. You need to show your intelligence capabilities. You need to show the way you defend your people. The second issue is the rocket threat. The rocket threat still exists. Today, as I told you, more than 120 rockets were fired by Hezbollah. And there are days with more than 200 rockets. So that threat has not been eliminated. And I'm not sure that a signed piece of paper, as respectful as it will be, will create in the full stop of the rocket firing. And the last thing is Iran. And here there is also, I think, some difference of opinions how to treat the Iranian issue. Since April 14th, when Iran attacked Israel directly, it has been obvious to the Israeli government that a red line has been crossed. By the way, also from the American perspective, after President Blinken said don't a million times, they still did. But the question is, how do you deal with the issue of Iran? Do you deal it with a force and then with an agreement? Do you deal only with sanctions and agreement? There are different options. And here also, there is conflicting kind of opinions on both sides. But overall, I want to say that I think there's a great appreciation. But even more than that, I want to say that there is an understanding that without a strong American support, Israel would not be able to fight these 7 fronts.
Well, that's fair, and it's very clear that the security assistance that the United States has provided has been essential for Israel, and I know that there are political implications of all of this, but there is broad American public support, and there always has been, and there always will be. And believe me, AJC will do whatever we can to make sure that that's always the case for Israel to have the ability to defend itself. We've been talking for almost an hour. I admire your ability to do that again and again. There are some questions that viewers have, and we're sort of running out of time, but I think we can squeeze in one. Daniel, would you like to do that?
Thank you, Jason. Yes, I'll actually squeeze in 2, but somewhat related, and perhaps you can weigh in on this too, Jason. So from Richard Schnadeker, it's talking about recent news, noting that Israel is considering an Egyptian proposal for ceasefire. So just asking some details on that, if there are any specifics that you can share there. And Janice Ellen is asking also a question about the region and given circumstances about Qatar, and should the U.S. be holding Qatar to a higher standard, for example, housing Hamas leaders, financial military aid, should there be consequences for their continued collaboration? So a few questions just about the region.
So very quickly to answer Richard's question, the proposal is not Egyptian, it's Israeli. And this is the proposal I spoke about, a smaller deal with a limited number of hostages, with a limited amount of days for a ceasefire. Obviously, the Egyptians are a key partner here. We share the same border and the same threats to some extent. So obviously, part of the pressure on Hamas could come from Egypt. Obviously, they control the border crossing from Gaza to Egypt. So it's the same proposal. As for Qatar, before Jason, maybe you want to answer, I will just say that obviously there are many complicated issues here on different levels. I just want to mention one of them. This is Al Jazeera, the most viewed TV channel in the Arab world, and the second generation can view it in other languages as well. And there's almost everywhere in the world you can find Al Jazeera of different languages. Today, the IDF revealed that 6 Al Jazeera reporters, so they actually presented themselves as Al Jazeera reporters, were actually fighters in different battalions in Hamas. So there's no question that Al Jazeera is the mouthpiece of Hamas, just like El Manar is doing so in Lebanon with Hezbollah. And of course, this is Qatari funded, founded, and so on. So yes, there are a lot of dangerous repercussions from Qatar's ideology, but right now, from our perspective, very narrow perspective here in Israel, we need Qatar to pressure Hamas. So some kind of a deal could actually work this time, and they haven't done the best of the pressure they could exert for a long time, and the expectation is to do more. And I do want to say that the relations have been complicated, but there were Israeli leaders who flew to Qatar and met on a regular basis with Qatari leadership in order to get this deal going. So we're putting aside, the ideology, the extremism, because we want to see those hostages home at the end of the day.
I wouldn't add too much in a public forum to what Avital just said. Obviously, there are reasons for great concern about the behavior of certain countries, and that is among them. But there's also, as Avital says, a role that Qatar has played that is essential, and we are counting on that role to continue. And there will be time after all of this is over to return to the questions that were raised by you, Janice. Thank you.
All right, Jason, I'll turn it back over to you.
Daniel, I think that wraps up our discussion, and I'm really grateful to you, Avital, for once again taking the time to provide really in-depth analysis of the situation after the elimination of Sinwar, after the elimination of Nasrallah, but really repeatedly throughout this long period that we've been in, to describe for the AJC family how Israel is coping with this crisis and the resilience of the Israeli people as you're fighting terror on so many fronts with the support of the United States and certainly with the support and admiration of our community around the world. So thank you for what you've been doing and for your role today. Daniel, I'll turn it back to you to say goodbye.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Avital, for today's Advocacy Anywhere program. And thanks to our global audience for tuning in. As a reminder, to stay up to date on the ever-evolving situation, make sure to follow AJC on social media at AJC Global. You can find more resources, and especially ways to take action at ajc.org/Israel@war. That is in the chat for everybody to see. That's ajc.org/Israel@war. We're very regularly adding new materials and updates. Our hearts are in Israel today and every day. And Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you, everyone.